The gunshot echoed across the golden prairie as Penelope Shaw clutched her swollen belly and ran faster than her weakened body should allow. Blood seeped through her tattered dress where a bullet had grazed her side, but it wasn't her own life she feared, for now it was the tiny one growing inside her. June 1878 had brought nothing but heartache since her husband's murder 3 days prior, and now his killers pursued her across the unforgiving Wyoming Territory. As the setting sun painted the horizon crimson, Penelope's vision blurred, her strength finally abandoning her as she collapsed among the tall grasses miles from any town or settlement. Wade Quincy wiped sweat from his brow, squinting at the herd of cattle he'd been driving northward since dawn. At 32, he'd spent half his life as a cowboy, the last 5 running his own modest ranch. The summer heat beat down mercilessly as he guided his horse along the perimeter of his property. That's when he spotted something unusual in the distance, a splash of blue fabric against the golden grass. Curious, he nudged his horse forward, expecting perhaps a discarded item from a passing wagon train. Instead, he found her a young woman lying unconscious, her chestnut hair splayed around her pale face, one hand protectively curved over her very pregnant belly. "Madam." Wade dismounted quickly, kneeling beside her. Her skin burned with fever and a bloodstain had spread across her side. "Can you hear me?" Penelope's eyelids fluttered briefly, but she couldn't summon the strength to respond. Her cracked lips parted in a silent plea before unconsciousness claimed her again. Without hesitation, Wade gathered her into his arms. Though he'd spent years on horseback and was no stranger to physical labor, he took extra care with her delicate state. He whistled for his horse, which dutifully approached. "Easy now," he murmured, more to himself than to the woman or the horse as he mounted while cradling her against his chest. Her head lolled against his shoulder as he adjusted his hold, ensuring both she and her unborn child were secure. "I've got you." The ride back to his ranch house seemed longer than ever before. Wade kept the pace steady, unwilling to risk jostling his fragile cargo. His mind raced with questions: who was she? What had happened? Where had she come from, and how had she ended up alone and injured in his field? As his modest ranch house came into view, Wade called out to his only ranch hand. "Thomas, need help here?" Thomas Peterson, a grizzled man in his 50s who'd been with Wade since he'd started his ranch, came running from the barn. His eyes widened at the sight of the unconscious woman. "Good Lord, where'd you find her?" "East pasture," Wade replied, carefully dismounting while still holding Penelope. "She's hurt and with child. Ride for Doc Morgan fast as you can." Thomas didn't waste time with questions. Immediately mounting his already saddled horse and galloping toward town 12 miles away, Wade carried Penelope into the house, straight to the spare bedroom he rarely used. With gentle hands, he laid her on the bed, immediately noticing how the mattress dipped under her weight, how small she seemed despite her pregnancy. "Madam," he tried again, but received no response. Wade dampened a cloth from the water pitcher on the nightstand and began to clean the dirt from her face. Her features came into sharper focus: high cheekbones, a delicate nose, and long eyelashes that cast shadows on her flushed cheeks. He guessed she couldn't be much older than 25. When he turned his attention to her wound, Wade hesitated. The propriety of undressing an unconscious woman warred with the necessity of tending her injury. Practicality won out. With careful movements, he unbuttoned just enough of her dress to access the wound on her side. Relief washed over him when he saw it wasn't as deep as he'd feared: a graze rather than a penetrating wound, but definitely from a bullet. "Who did this to you?" he whispered, cleaning the wound as best he could and applying pressure to stop the bleeding. As he worked, Penelope stirred, her eyes opening to reveal startling blue irises clouded with confusion and fear. She immediately tried to scramble away, a protective hand flying to her belly. "Easy now," Wade said, keeping his voice low and gentle. "You're safe here. I found you collapsed in my field. Her voice cracked, parched from dehydration. "They'll find me." Wade poured a glass of water and helped her take small sips. "Who will find you?" Tears filled her eyes. "The men who killed my husband." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Wade's jaw tightened as he absorbed this information, noting how her wedding ring still gleamed on her finger despite her disheveled state. "You're safe here," he repeated firmly. "I've sent for the doctor. You're at my ranch about 12 miles east of Clearwater. My name is Wade Quincy." "Penelope," she whispered, her strength visibly fading. "Penelope Shaw. Mrs. Shaw, can you tell me what happened?" But her eyes had already closed again, exhaustion claiming her. Wade continued tending to her wound, applying a clean bandage. He noticed bruises on her arms, signs of rough handling that made his blood boil despite not knowing the circumstances. 2 hours passed before Thomas returned with Doc Morgan, a bespectacled man in his 60s who'd been treating everyone within 30 miles for decades. "Found her out in the field, you say?" The doctor set his bag down, immediately moving to examine Penelope. "And she mentioned men after her." "Killing her husband?" Wade nodded. "That's all I got before she passed out again." Doc Morgan worked methodically, checking her wound, her pulse, and her pregnant belly with practiced hands. "Bullet graze isn't too serious. Fever's concerning, though. Dehydration, exhaustion, malnutrition, she's been on the run for days, I'd wager." He placed a hand on her abdomen, pressing gently at different points. "Baby seems all right, thank the Lord. She's about 7 months along, I'd estimate. Will she—" Wade couldn't finish the question. "With proper care, both should recover." The doctor fixed Wade with a stern look. "She needs rest, plenty of fluids, and good food when she wakes. The wound needs cleaning twice daily." He rummaged in his bag, producing several packets and bottles. "This for the fever, this for pain if she needs it. Change the bandage morning and night." Wade absorbed the instructions, committing them to memory. "And the baby. Monitor for any signs of early labor, cramping, bleeding. If either happens, send for me immediately." The doctor packed up his supplies. "Normally, I'd say bring her to town where she can be properly looked after, but if she's truly being pursued—" He trailed off, the implications clear. "She stays here," Wade said with finality. "I'll look after her." After the doctor left, Wade sat beside Penelope's bed, watching the gentle rise and fall of her chest. He'd never been one for complications. His life was orderly, predictable: cattle, horses, the occasional trip to town. Women had come and gone over the years, but none had stayed. His ranch demanded too much time, offered too little luxury for the kind of woman who might consider a life with him. Yet here he was, a mysterious pregnant widow under his roof, possibly with dangerous men on her trail. Every instinct told him to alert the sheriff, to distance himself from whatever trouble followed her. Instead, he found himself dampening another cloth, gently cooling her fevered brow as night fell. "Rest easy," he murmured. "You're not alone anymore." Dawn broke with Penelope's fever still raging. Wade had dozed in the chair beside her bed, waking every hour to check on her, to offer water when she stirred. As first light filtered through the curtains, her eyes opened, clearer than before. "You stayed," she whispered, surprise evident in her voice. Wade straightened, working the kinks from his neck. "Seemed the right thing to do." Penelope tried to sit up, wincing as the movement pulled at her wound. Wade immediately moved to help her, arranging pillows behind her back. "My baby." Her hands moved protectively to her belly. "Doctor says you're both doing all right, considering. The little one's a fighter like his mama." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "Or her mama, could be a girl." "Fair point." Wade stood, suddenly aware of how intimate the moment felt. "I'll get you something to eat. You need to build your strength." In the kitchen, Wade prepared a simple breakfast of oatmeal with honey and some dried apples he'd been saving. He was no cook, but he managed well enough for himself. As he worked, questions multiplied in his mind. Who had killed her husband? Why were they pursuing her? How far had she traveled in her condition? When he returned with the tray, he found Penelope looking around the room, taking in her surroundings with more awareness than before. "It's not much," he said, setting the tray across her lap, "but it's clean and safe." "It's lovely," she replied, and something in her tone suggested she meant it. "Thank you, Mr. Quincy, for everything." "Wade," he corrected gently. "Just Wade is fine." As she ate slowly, carefully, Wade pulled the chair closer. "Mrs. Shaw, Penelope, please." Penelope. The name felt right on his tongue. I don't mean to press you when you're recovering, but I need to understand what's happening. You mentioned men who killed your husband who are looking for you. Are they likely to come this way? Fear flashed across her face, but she squared her shoulders with remarkable composure. They might. They're determined. She set down her spoon, meeting his gaze directly. My husband James was a banker in Silverdale, about 60 miles south of here. 3 days ago, a group of men robbed the bank. They shot him when he wouldn't open the safe. Wade nodded, encouraging her to continue. There was a ledger, she said, her voice dropping. James kept a separate record of certain transactions. Large deposits, suspicious activity. He suspected someone local was laundering money through the bank. Her hand trembled slightly as she reached for the water glass. The men who killed him, they wanted that ledger. James had hidden it. I was the only one who knew where. And now they're after you because of this ledger, Penelope nodded. They came to our home that night. I heard them talking outside. They said they needed to take care of the wife before she could talk. Her eyes filled with tears. I grabbed what I could and ran out the back. I've been running ever since, staying off the main roads. 60 miles on foot in your condition. Wade couldn't hide his astonishment. I had a horse the first day, she explained, but it went lame and I had to continue on foot. I thought I might reach Clearwater, find the sheriff there. Wade considered this information carefully. Do you know who these men are? 3 of them. I recognized one seal as Black. He owns half the businesses in Silverdale. The other 2 were his regular men, Reeves and Miller. The names meant nothing to Wade, but the situation was clear enough. A powerful man, a damning ledger, and a witness who needed to be silenced. And the ledger, Penelope hesitated, wariness evident in her expression. I understand if you don't trust me yet, Wade said gently. You've been through hell. She studied him for a long moment, then reached beneath her dress collar, withdrawing a small key on a chain around her neck. The ledger is in a deposit box at the Clearwater Bank. James had arrangements with banks in neighboring towns, contingencies, he called them. Wade nodded, impressed by the foresight. Smart man, your husband, he was. Grief flashed across her features. We were only married 2 years. He was so excited about the baby. An uncomfortable silence fell between them. What comfort could Wade possibly offer for such a loss? Instead, he focused on practicalities. You need to rest and heal. Both of you do. Once you're stronger, we can figure out how to get that ledger to the proper authorities. I can't impose on you like this, Penelope protested. You've already done so much, and I've brought danger to your doorstep. Mrs. Shaw, Penelope, Wade corrected himself. I found you half dead in my field. I'm not about to send you back out there, especially not with men hunting you. His voice softened. Besides, I've got a spare room and more food than one man needs. Seems like Providence put you here. Tears welled in Penelope's eyes again, but she blinked them back with determination. Thank you. I don't know how I'll ever repay your kindness. No need for that kind of talk. Wade stood, suddenly uncomfortable with the gratitude in her eyes. You focus on getting better. I've got chores to tend to, but I'll check on you throughout the day. Thomas, my ranch hand, is around if you need anything urgent. As he turned to leave, Penelope called after him. Wade, these men, they're dangerous. If they track me here, let me worry about that, he said firmly. This is my land. Nobody comes onto it meaning harm without answering to me. Outside, Wade took a deep breath of the fresh morning air, trying to clear his head. In just one day, his orderly life had been completely upended. Yet despite the potential danger, despite the complication of housing a pregnant widow on the run, he couldn't bring himself to regret finding Penelope Shaw. The morning passed in a blur of routine ranch work, checking fences, moving cattle to fresh pasture, examining a mare that might be ready to foal soon. Thomas, usually a man of few words, was uncharacteristically curious. She on the run from something bad? He asked as they worked side by side repairing a section of fence. Her husband was murdered. Men responsible are after her, Wade replied simply. Thomas nodded, hammering a nail with extra force. Bastards going after a woman in her condition. My thoughts exactly. You planning to involve Sheriff Davis? Wade considered this. Not yet. She needs to recover first, and I'm not sure how far these men's influence reaches. Smart thinking. Thomas paused, giving Wade a sideways glance. You know this makes things complicated. I'm aware. Just checking. Thomas returned to his work, and that was the end of the conversation. By mid-afternoon, Wade returned to the house to check on Penelope. He found her sleeping peacefully, her fever noticeably reduced. Rather than disturb her, he left a fresh pitcher of water and some bread and cheese on the nightstand for when she woke. The next few days settled into a rhythm. Penelope grew stronger, able to sit up for longer periods and eventually to take short, careful walks around the bedroom. Wade tended her wound, which was healing well, and made sure she ate properly at every meal. They talked tentatively at first, then with increasing ease. He learned she'd grown up in St. Louis, the daughter of a schoolteacher. She'd come west when her father took a position in Colorado, eventually meeting James when he came through town on banking business. Wade shared stories of his own life growing up on a failing farm in Kansas, leaving at 17 to find work as a cowboy, saving every penny until he could buy his own small plot 5 years ago. It's impressive what you've built here, Penelope said on the fourth evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. Dr. Morgan had visited that afternoon, declaring her recovery remarkable and the baby doing just fine. It's modest compared to some, Wade replied, but it's mine. No debts, no partners, just me making my own way. That's worth more than grand houses built on shaky foundations, Penelope said softly, her hand absently stroking her belly. James and I had plans like that, something small but ours, something to leave our child. The mention of her husband brought a familiar shadow to her eyes. Wade had noticed it happened less frequently now, but the grief was still raw. You'll still give your child a good life, Wade said. You're strong, Penelope, stronger than most men I know. She looked at him then, really looked at him, as if seeing something new. Thank you for saying that. Sometimes I don't feel strong at all. That's just because you can't see yourself the way others do. The words hung between them, unexpectedly intimate. Wade cleared his throat and stood. It's getting cool. We should head inside. That night, Wade lay awake longer than usual, troubled by feelings he hadn't anticipated. Penelope was beautiful, yes, but it was more than that. Her resilience, her quiet dignity in the face of devastating loss, the way she spoke about her hopes and dreams, it all resonated with him in ways he hadn't experienced before. But she was pregnant with another man's child, newly widowed and in danger. The last thing she needed was a lonely rancher developing inappropriate feelings. Wade resolved to maintain appropriate distance while still providing the protection and support she needed. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Wade was chopping wood when he spotted a rider approaching from the direction of town. As the figure drew closer, he recognized Sheriff Davis from Clearwater, a capable lawman Wade respected. Sheriff, Wade greeted him, setting down his axe. What brings you out this way? Davis dismounted, his expression serious. Got some troubling news, Quincy. Thought you should know directly. He glanced toward the house. That the Shaw woman inside, Wade tensed. How did you, Doc Morgan, mention treating a pregnant widow staying with you? Description matches a woman wanted for questioning down in Silverdale. Questioning about what exactly? Wade asked, keeping his voice level despite the alarm bells ringing in his head. The sheriff removed his hat, running a hand through graying hair. Allegedly stealing bank funds and fleeing after her husband's murder. 3 men rode into Clearwater yesterday asking questions, showing a poster, said she's unstable, dangerous even. That's horseshit, Wade said flatly. She's the victim here, not the criminal. Davis held up a placating hand. I figured as much. Those men didn't sit right with me, especially the one called Black, too slick by half. Relief washed over Wade. They're in Clearwater now. Left this morning, said they were continuing north, but I'd wager they'll circle back once they've thrown off any suspicion. The sheriff's eyes narrowed. What's really going on here, Wade? Wade quickly explained what Penelope had told him: the robbery, the ledger, her escape. Davis listened intently, occasionally nodding. That fits with some rumors I've heard about Black, he said when Wade finished. Man's got money that can't all be legitimate, and I never did believe a pregnant woman gunned down her husband for money. She needs to get that ledger to someone who can act on it, Wade said, but she's still recovering and with those men looking for her. I'll help, Davis said firmly. But we need to be careful. If Black has the influence I suspect, going through official channels could alert him. He thought for a moment. I've got a friend in the federal marshal's office in Cheyenne. He's been trying to build a case against several financial operations in the territory. This ledger might be exactly what he needs. How do we get it to him safely? Let me handle that part. I'll send a telegram in code, arrange a meeting. The sheriff replaced his hat. In the meantime, keep her hidden. Those men believe she's continuing north, but they struck me as the thorough type. Wade nodded grimly. I appreciate the warning, Sheriff. Just doing my job. Davis mounted his horse. And Wade, be careful. Men like Black don't hesitate to remove obstacles. After the sheriff departed, Wade entered the house to find Penelope standing in the hallway, her face pale with fear. I heard, she said. They're looking for me. Wade stepped closer, fighting the urge to take her hands in his. The sheriff's on our side. He's going to help us get the ledger to federal authorities. I've put you in danger, Penelope whispered, distress evident in her voice, just by being here. I chose this, Wade reminded her gently, and I'm not sorry for it. Tears filled her eyes. Why are you doing this? You don't even know me. The question caught Wade off guard. Why indeed? The practical reasons he'd been telling himself, basic human decency, the obligation to help someone in need, suddenly seemed insufficient to explain the depth of his commitment. I know enough, he finally said. I know you're brave and determined. I know you're willing to risk everything to bring your husband's killers to justice. And I know that you and your child deserve a chance at life. Penelope studied his face, searching for something. Whatever she saw there caused a subtle shift in her expression, surprise, followed by something warmer. Thank you, she said softly, for everything. The moment was interrupted by Thomas calling from outside. Wade stepped back, suddenly aware of how close they'd been standing. I should see what he needs, he said. Why don't you rest? I'll bring lunch in a bit. The following days passed in a state of heightened vigilance. Wade instructed Thomas to take extra precautions, checking the property perimeter regularly, keeping the horses saddled and ready if a quick departure became necessary. They moved Penelope's things to a smaller bedroom at the back of the house, with easy access to the rear door and a view of the approaching countryside. Despite the underlying tension, there was also an unexpected sweetness to those days. Penelope grew stronger, able to move around the house more freely. She insisted on helping with indoor chores, preparing meals that far surpassed Wade's bachelor cooking. In the evenings, they sat together on the back porch where they couldn't be seen from the road, talking until the stars came out. Wade learned about her childhood dreams of becoming a writer, how she'd kept journals since she was a girl. She extracted from him stories of his cowboy days that he'd rarely shared with anyone, the beauty of sleeping under the stars, the camaraderie of cattle drives, the quiet pride of watching the land change with the seasons. I've never met anyone quite like you, Wade Quincy, Penelope said one evening as they sat side by side, watching fireflies dance in the gathering darkness. Is that good or bad? He asked with a half smile. Good, she replied without hesitation. Most men I've known were either like my father, scholarly, thoughtful but disconnected from the physical world, or like the businessmen James worked with, focused entirely on money and status. You're neither. You think deeply but live in the moment. You're connected to this land in a way that's beautiful to witness. The compliment warmed him in unexpected ways. Well, I've never met anyone like you either, Penelope Shaw. Most women take one look at this place and see nothing but hard work and isolation. And I see freedom, she finished for him. The space to breathe, to create your own world. Their eyes met in the twilight, and Wade felt something shift between them, a recognition, a possibility neither had acknowledged before. Penelope looked away first, her hand moving to her belly as the baby kicked. Someone's active tonight, she said with a small laugh. Wade hesitated, then asked, May I? After a moment's pause, Penelope nodded and gently took his hand, placing it where the movement was strongest. Wade held his breath as he felt the unmistakable push of tiny limbs against his palm. "That's amazing," he whispered, genuinely awed by the miracle of life beneath his fingers. "It is," Penelope agreed, her voice equally soft. When Wade finally withdrew his hand, the absence of connection felt palpable between them. The spell was broken by the distant sound of approaching horses. Wade was on his feet instantly, hand moving to the revolver at his hip. "Inside," he said quietly but firmly. "Back room like we practiced." Penelope didn't argue, immediately retreating into the house. Wade moved to the corner of the porch where he could observe the approaching riders without being easily spotted. His tension eased slightly when he recognized Sheriff Davis alongside another man in a long coat. "Evening, Wade," Davis called as they drew closer. "Hope we're not interrupting dinner." "Not at all," Wade replied, stepping into view but keeping his hand near his weapon until he was certain they were alone. "This the marshal you mentioned?" Davis nodded. "U.S. Marshal Robert Hayes. He's here about our mutual concern." The marshal, a lean man with a weathered face and shrewd eyes, dismounted with practiced ease. "Sheriff Davis filled me in. I've been building a case against Silas Black and his associates for over a year. This ledger could be the evidence we need." Wade invited the men inside, calling for Penelope once he was certain it was safe. She emerged from the back room, visibly nervous but composed. When Wade introduced the marshal, hope flashed across her features. "Mrs. Shaw," Hayes said respectfully, "I'm deeply sorry for your loss." "Your husband sounds like he was a man of principle." "He was," Penelope confirmed, sitting down carefully at the kitchen table. "He believed in doing what was right, even when it wasn't easy." "We need to get that ledger," Hayes said, getting straight to business. "But we need to do it without alerting Black that we have it. If he knows we're building a case, he might flee the territory or destroy other evidence." "I have the key," Penelope said, touching the chain around her neck. "But Black and his men are looking for me if they see me in Clearwater." "That's why you won't be going," Hayes explained. "We'll use a bank draft with your signature authorizing removal of the contents. The sheriff will present it along with the key." Penelope frowned. "The bank manager knows me. Won't he find that suspicious?" "I've already spoken with him," Davis interjected. "Confidentially, he's willing to cooperate, especially since the alternative might be being implicated in Black's schemes." The plan was sound, but Wade could see Penelope's hesitation. "What happens after you have the ledger?" she asked. "I take it to Cheyenne, present the evidence to a federal judge, and get arrest warrants for Black and anyone else implicated," Hayes explained. "The process could take a week or two, but once the warrants are issued, Black's influence won't matter anymore." "And until then?" Wade asked. "Penelope's still in danger. She needs to stay hidden," Hayes confirmed. "Black's men were in Clearwater again today, asking more questions. They're not giving up." The gravity of the situation settled over the room. Wade looked at Penelope, seeing the fatigue in her eyes despite her brave front. She was 7.5 months pregnant now, still recovering from her ordeal, and the stress couldn't be good for her or the baby. "She stays here," Wade said with finality. "We'll keep her safe until this is over." Hayes studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Very well. Mrs. Shaw, if you could write that authorization and provide the key, we can proceed first thing tomorrow." After Penelope had written the document and reluctantly handed over the key that had been her last connection to James, the lawmen prepared to leave. As they mounted their horses, Hayes turned back to Wade. "Quincy, be vigilant. Black's getting desperate. We've heard he's hired additional men, not just his usual associates." "Understood," Wade replied grimly. That night, after checking all doors and windows twice, Wade sat cleaning his rifle in the main room. Penelope appeared in the doorway of the guest room, wrapped in a shawl against the evening chill. "You should rest," Wade said, looking up from his work. "I can't sleep," she admitted, coming to sit in the chair opposite him. "Every time I close my eyes, I see them, the men who killed James, coming for me." Wade set aside the rifle. "I won't let anything happen to you or your baby. I believe you." Her eyes met his in the lamplight. "That's what scares me. You're willing to risk everything for someone you barely know." "I know you better than you think," Wade said softly. Penelope looked down at her hands. Wade, if something happens, it won't, he interrupted. But if it does, she persisted, I want you to know how grateful I am, not just for saving my life, but for. She struggled to find the words, for making me feel safe, for treating me like a person, not just a widow or a victim. Wade felt a tightness in his chest. Penelope, please, she said, raising her eyes to his again. Let me finish. I never expected to feel this way again, especially not now. It's confusing and probably inappropriate, but I can't deny that I've come to care for you. The admission hung in the air between them, honest and vulnerable. Wade sat perfectly still, afraid that any movement might break the fragile moment. You don't have to say anything, Penelope continued, her cheeks flushing. I know the timing is impossible. I'm carrying another man's child, running from killers imposing on your life. But after everything that's happened, I've learned that some things need to be said while there's still time to say them. Wade finally moved, leaning forward to take her hands in his. The timing is impossible, he agreed, but my feelings aren't. He took a deep breath. I've never believed in love at first sight, respect, attraction, sure. But this what I feel for you, it's grown day by day, watching your courage, your kindness, your strength. I care for you too, Penelope, more than I should, perhaps, but I can't regret it. Tears filled her eyes. What do we do with this? For now, nothing. Wade squeezed her hands gently. We focus on keeping you and your baby safe. We give you time to heal in all ways, and then we see what possibilities the future holds. Penelope nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. Wade reached up to brush it away, his thumb lingering against her skin. For a breathless moment, he thought he might kiss her. Instead, he stood, helping her to her feet. You should try to sleep, he said gently. Tomorrow might be a long day, and you? She asked. I'll keep watch a while longer. She nodded, understanding. Before turning away, she raised herself on tiptoe and pressed a soft kiss to his cheek. Good night, Wade. Good night, Penelope. Long after she had gone, Wade remained in the chair, his cheek still warm from her kiss, his heart fuller than it had ever been. Dawn brought the sound of approaching horses, far too many for it to be the sheriff returning. Wade was instantly alert, grabbing his rifle and moving to the window. What he saw made his blood run cold. 6 riders approached, spread out in a practiced formation that suggested they knew exactly what they were doing. Penelope, he called urgently, moving quickly to her room. We need to go, now. She was already awake, sitting up in bed with fear in her eyes. They found me. Looks that way. Wade helped her up, handing her a shawl. Thomas has a wagon ready behind the barn. We planned for this, remember? Penelope nodded, remarkably composed despite the danger. She slipped on her shoes while Wade gathered the small bag of essentials they'd prepared days ago. Head out the back door, Wade instructed. Stay low, use the clothesline as cover until you reach the chicken coop, then make straight for the back of the barn. Thomas is waiting. What about you? Penelope asked, concern evident in her voice. I'll be right behind you. I need to slow them down first. When she hesitated, he added, Please, Penelope, trust me. After a moment, she nodded and slipped out the back door. Wade returned to the front of the house, positioning himself by the window with his rifle ready. He watched as the riders approached, recognizing the man in front from Penelope's description, Silas Black, impeccably dressed even on horseback, his silver mustache precisely trimmed. Wade waited until they were within earshot before calling out, That's far enough. The riders stopped, Black raising a hand to halt his men. We're looking for a woman, he called back. Penelope Shaw, we have reason to believe she's here. Nobody here but me, Wade replied, keeping his rifle visible. And I don't take kindly to armed men on my property. Black's smile didn't reach his eyes. Mr. Quincy, I presume we've heard you've been harboring a fugitive. A confused, dangerous woman who murdered her husband and stole from his bank. Sounds like you've heard wrong, Wade said coldly. Now turn around and ride out. One of Black's men, a scar-faced individual with dead eyes, leaned in to whisper something. Black nodded slightly before addressing Wade again. There's a wagon moving behind your barn, Mr. Quincy. Would that be your ranch hand Thomas taking Mrs. Shaw to safety? His smile widened at Wade's expression. We've been watching your property since yesterday. Did you really think we wouldn't have men positioned in the hills? Wade's mind raced. If they knew about the wagon, Penelope and Thomas were in immediate danger. He had to create a diversion. She's not here, Wade insisted, but I am. And I don't think all 6 of you together have enough courage to come take this rifle from me. It was a calculated insult, designed to focus their attention on him rather than the escaping wagon. The scarred man snarled, reaching for his pistol, but Black stopped him with a gesture. There's no need for bloodshed, Mr. Quincy. Simply tell us where Mrs. Shaw is going and you can continue your life undisturbed. We only want what belongs to us. Nothing about Penelope Shaw belongs to you, Wade replied, raising his rifle. Now this is your last warning. Get off my land. Black's pleasant demeanor vanished. Very well. Richardson, Cooper, circle around to the barn, the rest of you with me. Wade didn't hesitate. He fired a warning shot that kicked up dirt just in front of Black's horse, causing it to rear in panic. The momentary confusion was all Wade needed to dash from the house toward the back, staying low and using the buildings for cover. Gunshots rang out behind him as Black's men returned fire, bullets splintering wood where he had been moments before. Wade sprinted for the small corral behind the main barn where his fastest horse was already saddled, another part of their escape plan. He could hear hoofbeats as 2 riders circled around, trying to cut him off. Wade ducked behind a water trough just as a bullet whizzed past his ear. Taking careful aim, he fired at the closest rider, not to kill but to disable. The man cried out as the bullet struck his shoulder, toppling from his horse. The second rider pulled up short, giving Wade the opening he needed to make a run for his horse. He swung into the saddle in one fluid motion, immediately spurring the animal toward the back trail where the wagon had gone. More shots followed him, but Wade kept low over his horse's neck, zigzagging to make himself a harder target. As he crested the small rise behind his property, he could see the wagon in the distance, moving as fast as the terrain allowed toward the tree line that marked the beginning of more rugged country. Wade pushed his horse harder, closing the distance quickly. Thomas had spotted him coming and slowed the wagon slightly to allow him to catch up. They know, Wade called as he drew alongside. They had men watching from the hills, Thomas cursed, snapping the reins to urge the horses faster. In the back of the wagon, Penelope sat braced against the rough movement, her face pale but determined. How many following? Thomas asked. At least 5, maybe 6, Wade replied, checking behind them. We need to reach Settlers Canyon. They can't bring horses through the narrow part. Thomas nodded grimly. 3 miles to the entrance. Think we can make it? We have to. Wade looked at Penelope. Are you all right? She nodded, one hand on her belly, the other gripping the wagon side. Don't worry about me, just get us somewhere safe. The next 20 minutes were a desperate race across increasingly rough terrain. The wagon bounced violently over rocks and ruts, forcing Thomas to slow on the steeper inclines despite the danger behind them. Wade rode alongside, constantly scanning for signs of pursuit, his rifle ready across his saddle. They had just come within sight of the canyon entrance when Wade spotted dust rising behind them. They're coming, he warned. Thomas, get Penelope into the canyon. I'll hold them off at the entrance. Wade, no, Penelope protested. There are too many of them. The canyon narrows just a quarter mile in, Wade explained quickly. 1 man can defend it against 20 if he has to. I'll be right behind you once you're safely through. Thomas met Wade's eyes, a wordless understanding passing between them. He would protect Penelope with his life if necessary. Be careful, Penelope pleaded as Thomas snapped the reins, urging the horses toward the canyon entrance. Wade positioned himself behind a large boulder near the canyon mouth, dismounting and sending his horse to follow the wagon. From this vantage point, he could see the approaching riders, 4 men, with Black himself leading them. The 2 others must have been injured or sent for reinforcements. Wade took careful aim as they came into range, firing a shot that struck the ground directly in front of them. The riders pulled up, taking cover behind rocks and scrub. You're making a mistake, Quincy, Black called out. The woman is a murderer and a thief. We both know that's a lie, Wade shouted back. You killed her husband when he found evidence of your crimes. Now you want to silence her too. A bullet ricocheted off the boulder near Wade's head, their answer to his accusation. The standoff had begun. For the next 15 minutes, Wade engaged in a careful exchange of fire, never staying in one position long enough to give them a clear shot, but maintaining enough pressure to keep them pinned down. His goal wasn't to kill, though he could have easily done so several times, but to buy time for Thomas and Penelope to reach the defensible part of the canyon. The strategy was working until Wade heard a sound that turned his blood to ice. Penelope's scream, echoing from within the canyon. Without hesitation, he fired several rapid shots to keep Black's men down, then ran for the canyon entrance, staying low and using the rocks for cover. As he entered the narrow passage, Wade could hear gunfire ahead. Had Black sent men around another way? The canyon was supposed to be accessible only through this entrance, unless Wade's pace quickened as understanding dawned. Black had mentioned watching the ranch since yesterday. They could have sent men to the canyon in anticipation, knowing it was the most likely escape route. The passage widened slightly as Wade rounded a bend, bringing into view a scene that confirmed his worst fears. The wagon had been stopped by a fallen tree across the path, clearly deliberately placed. Thomas was down, bleeding from a wound to his leg but still conscious. Using the wagon for cover as he exchanged fire with two men positioned on the canyon rim above, Penelope was nowhere in sight, which Wade prayed meant Thomas had managed to hide her before the ambush. Wade didn't hesitate. Taking careful aim, he fired at one of the men above, striking him in the arm. The man fell back with a cry, his weapon clattering down the canyon wall. The second man turned his attention to this new threat, giving Thomas the opportunity to fire, his shot finding its mark in the man's shoulder. "Thomas," Wade called as he ran forward, keeping his eye on the wounded men above. "Where's Penelope?" "Small cave," Thomas grunted, gesturing to a narrow opening in the canyon wall near the wagon. "Got her in there when I saw the tree, told her to stay put no matter what." Wade reached the wagon, quickly checking Thomas's wound. "How bad?" "Clean through, I'll live," Thomas grimaced. "But we've got bigger problems. Black and his men will be coming in behind you. And these two might have friends nearby," Wade added, glancing up at the wounded men who had retreated from view. "We need to move. Can you ride?" Thomas nodded grimly. "If it means getting Mrs. Shaw to safety, I can ride." Wade quickly moved to the cave entrance. "Penelope, it's Wade." "We need to go now." Penelope emerged cautiously, relief washing over her face when she saw him. "Wade, I heard shooting. No time to explain," he interrupted gently, helping her out. "Thomas is hurt but can travel. We need to get through the canyon before Black's men catch up." They worked quickly to clear enough of the fallen tree for the wagon to pass, then helped Thomas onto the driver's seat. Wade insisted Penelope ride in the back where she would be less exposed, while he took his position alongside on foot, leading his horse, which had followed faithfully. "The canyon opens to a valley about a mile ahead," Wade explained as they moved forward. "There's an old line shack there, belonged to the previous owner of my ranch. We can shelter there while I figure out our next move." The journey through the remainder of the canyon was tense but uninterrupted. The wounded men on the rim had apparently retreated, and Black's group hadn't yet caught up to them. When they finally emerged into the small valley Wade had described, the line shack was visible in the distance, a simple one-room structure built against a rocky hillside. "It's not much," Wade apologized as they approached, "but it's solid and defensible." The shack was indeed basic, a single room with a small stove, a rough wooden table, 2 chairs, and a narrow cot. But the walls were sturdy logs, the roof was intact, and most importantly, it had a clear view of anyone approaching from the canyon. Wade helped Thomas inside, settling him on the cot where Penelope could tend his wound. The bullet had passed clean through the fleshy part of his thigh, painful but not life-threatening if infection could be prevented. "I'll get water from the stream," Wade said, grabbing a bucket from beside the stove. "Penelope, there should be some basic supplies in that trunk in the corner. See what you can find for Thomas's leg." Outside, Wade filled the bucket quickly, his eyes constantly scanning the valley. They had perhaps an hour before Black and his men figured out where they'd gone. The line shack was defensible, but they couldn't stay indefinitely, especially with Thomas injured and Penelope's condition. When he returned, Penelope had found some reasonably clean cloth and was carefully cleaning Thomas's wound. The older man's face was pale but determined. "We need to get word to Sheriff Davis," Wade said as he set down the water. "Black's men will have us surrounded before nightfall." "There's another way out," Thomas said through gritted teeth. "Behind the shack, there's a trail up the hillside. Too narrow for horses or wagons, but a person on foot could make it. Leads to the North Ridge, eventually connects with the main road to Clearwater." Wade nodded, considering their options. "One of us needs to go for help. Thomas can't travel with that leg and Penelope." "Don't say I can't go because I'm pregnant," Penelope interrupted, her eyes flashing with determination. "I've already crossed 60 miles of territory in this condition, and nearly died doing it," Wade reminded her gently. "Besides, I need you here. Thomas can shoot, but in his condition, he can't move quickly if the shack is rushed. You're the only one who can help him while I'm gone." Penelope wanted to argue, but the logic was sound. "How long will it take you to reach Clearwater if I leave now and push hard?" "I could make town by nightfall, bring help back by dawn." Wade moved to check his ammunition, reloading his revolver and rifle methodically. "You two just need to hold out until then. And if Black's men find us before you return," Thomas asked the question they were all thinking. Wade's expression hardened. "The shack has only one door and 2 windows, both with shutters. Keep them barred. There's a loose floorboard by the stove with extra ammunition hidden underneath. Make every shot count if they try to rush you." He hesitated, then continued grimly, "The hillside trail is your last resort." The gravity of the situation settled over them. Wade knelt beside Penelope, taking her hands in his. "I don't want to leave you," he said quietly, "but it's our best chance." Penelope squeezed his hands, her eyes meeting his with unwavering trust. "We'll be here when you get back, I promise." Wade nodded, throat tight with emotion. Before he could second-guess himself, he leaned forward and pressed a gentle kiss to her lips, brief, but filled with everything he couldn't say aloud. When he pulled back, Penelope's eyes were shining with tears, and something else, a determination that matched his own. "I'll come back with help," he promised. "Just stay safe until then." With a final nod to Thomas, who acknowledged the unspoken request to protect Penelope at all costs, Wade slipped out the back of the shack. The hillside trail was little more than a game path, steep and treacherous in places, but he moved quickly, driven by the knowledge that every minute counted. As he reached the ridge an hour later, Wade paused to look back at the valley below. From this vantage point, he could see the line shack still peaceful for the moment, but also movement at the canyon mouth. Black's men had arrived and were spreading out, clearly searching for their quarry. It wouldn't be long before they discovered the shack. With renewed urgency, Wade continued along the ridge, pushing himself to maintain a grueling pace despite the rough terrain. The sun climbed higher in the sky, then began its descent as he finally connected with the main road to Clearwater. By his estimation, he was still at least 3 hours from town, and Black's men were likely already closing in on the shack. The knowledge spurred him to run when he could, walk when he had to, ignoring the growing fatigue in his muscles and the painful throb of blisters forming on his feet. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the landscape in gold and crimson, Wade's mind was filled with images of Penelope, her smile, her courage, the feel of her lips against his. He had to reach help in time. There was no alternative he could accept. Dusk was settling when Wade finally spotted the lights of Clearwater in the distance. His second wind propelled him forward, into the town and straight to the sheriff's office. To his immense relief, both Sheriff Davis and Marshal Hayes were there, poring over what appeared to be the bank ledger. "Black found us," Wade gasped, leaning against the doorframe to stay upright. "Penelope and Thomas are trapped at the old line shack in Hidden Valley. Black's men were closing in when I left this morning. Both lawmen were on their feet instantly. How many men with Black? Hayes demanded. At least 6 that I saw, Wade replied. Maybe more by now. Davis was already gathering weapons. I'll round up some deputies. Hayes, you want to bring in the Army detachment from Fort Collins? No time, the marshal replied grimly, if they've been surrounded since morning. He didn't need to finish the thought. Within 30 minutes, a posse of 8 men was assembled: the sheriff, the marshal, Wade, and 5 deputies, all heavily armed and mounted on the fastest horses available. Wade had briefly considered taking time to rest, but the thought of Penelope and Thomas facing Black's men alone drove him back into the saddle despite his exhaustion. We'll approach from the North Ridge, Wade explained as they rode out of town. It's the only way to surprise them if they've surrounded the shack. The return journey was agonizingly slow despite their haste. Riding through unfamiliar territory in darkness required caution, but every delay grated on Wade's nerves. Dawn was still hours away when they finally reached the North Ridge, dismounting to continue on foot to avoid detection. As they crept closer, the situation below became clear in the moonlight. The line shack was surrounded by at least 8 men, positioned in a loose circle around the building. Occasional flashes of gunfire indicated that Penelope and Thomas were still holding out, but for how much longer? Marshal Hayes assessed the situation with practiced eyes. They're keeping their distance, waiting for daylight or trying to wear down the ammunition inside, standard siege tactics. We need to draw some of them away, Sheriff Davis suggested. Create a diversion on one side, then hit them from another. The plan was quickly formed. 3 deputies would create a distraction from the east, firing from cover to draw attention. Meanwhile, Wade, Hayes, Davis, and the remaining deputies would approach from the west, taking advantage of a small gully that provided cover almost to the shack itself. Remember, Hayes instructed as they prepared to move out, Black is wanted alive. We need his testimony to connect all the pieces. Wade nodded grimly, though privately he cared far more about Penelope's safety than Black's prosecution. If it came down to a choice between justice and protecting her, he knew which he would choose. The diversion worked better than they could have hoped. When the deputies began firing from the east, 5 of Black's men immediately redirected their attention, giving Wade's group the opportunity to advance unseen through the gully. They were within 30 yards of the shack when one of Black's lookouts spotted them, shouting a warning. The night erupted in gunfire. Wade and the lawman took cover behind rocks and uneven ground, returning fire with precision. 2 of Black's men went down in the first exchange, while another retreated with an injury. "Cover me," Wade called to Hayes, who nodded and immediately laid down suppressive fire. Wade darted forward, zigzagging toward the shack. A bullet kicked up dirt by his foot, another tugged at his sleeve, but he kept moving. 20 yards, then 10, then he was at the back of the shack, pounding on the wall. "Penelope, Thomas, it's Wade." The sound of a bar lifting came from inside, and the back window shutter opened a crack. Penelope's face appeared, relief washing over her features when she saw him. "Wade, thank God." She pushed the shutter wider. "Thomas is hurt worse. One of them got a shot through the window. He's lost a lot of blood." "We've got help," Wade assured her, glancing back to where Hayes and the others were still exchanging fire with Black's men. "The sheriff and marshal are here with deputies. We're going to get you out." Penelope nodded, then suddenly ducked as a bullet splintered the wood near the window. Wade fired back in the direction the shot had come from, hearing a cry that indicated he'd found his mark. "I'm coming in," he decided, climbing through the window with Penelope's help. Inside, the situation was dire. Thomas lay on the cot, his face ashen, a fresh bandage on his leg soaked with blood. He managed a weak smile when he saw Wade. "Took your time, didn't you?" he rasped. "Traffic was terrible," Wade replied with forced lightness, quickly checking the older man's wound. The bullet had struck an artery not immediately fatal if treated, but Thomas had already lost too much blood. "We need to get you to a doctor." "I know a lost cause when I see one," Thomas said quietly, his eyes clear despite his weakness. "Just get Mrs. Shaw to safety." "We're all getting out," Wade insisted, though he knew Thomas was right. Outside, the gunfire was intensifying. The deputies from the eastern position had worked their way around, creating a crossfire that had Black's remaining men pinned down. It was their best chance to escape. "Can you walk at all?" Wade asked Penelope, noting how tired she looked after the long siege. "Yes," she replied firmly. "I'm fine. It's Thomas we need to worry about." Wade made a quick decision. "I'll carry him. You stay close behind me. We'll go out the back, up the hillside trail just far enough to reach the deputies on the ridge." As he bent to lift Thomas, the older man grabbed his arm with surprising strength. "Wait," he said, his voice barely audible. "Leave me the rifle. I can still shoot. I'll cover your escape." "Thomas, no, don't argue, boy." Thomas's eyes held a determination Wade recognized all too well. "I'm done for anyway. Let me do this one last thing." Wade hesitated, then nodded, understanding this was Thomas's choice. He helped position the man by the window with a clear view of the area Penelope would need to cross. "It's been an honor working with you, Thomas," Wade said, his throat tight likewise. Thomas managed a small smile. "Now get her out of here." With a heavy heart, Wade turned to Penelope, who had witnessed the exchange with tears in her eyes. "We need to go, now." He took her hand, leading her to the back door. "When I open this, run straight for that boulder at the base of the trail. Don't stop, don't look back. I'll be right beside you." Penelope nodded, steeling herself. Wade counted to 3, then threw open the door. They burst out together, Wade keeping his body between Penelope and the main direction of fire. Thomas's rifle cracked from the window, followed by a cry of pain from someone who had been aiming at the fleeing pair. Another shot rang out, and another, as the loyal ranch hand provided the covering fire he had promised. They had almost reached the boulder when Wade heard Penelope gasp in pain. He turned to see her stumbling, clutching her belly. "Are you hit?" he asked urgently, pulling her behind the rock as bullets whizzed overhead. "No," she panted, her face contorted. It's the baby. Something's wrong." Wade's blood ran cold. Whether from stress, exertion, or the trauma of the siege, Penelope had gone into labor 2 months early and in the worst possible circumstances. "Marshal," Wade shouted toward the ridge where Hayes and a deputy had taken position. "We need help. She's in labor." Hayes immediately dispatched the deputy to assist while he continued providing cover fire. The man scrambled down to their position, eyes widening when he saw Penelope's condition. "We need to get her up to the horses," the deputy said. "Can she climb?" Another contraction hit, causing Penelope to cry out and grip Wade's hand with surprising strength. "I don't think so," Wade replied grimly. The deputy assessed the situation quickly. "There's too much open ground between here and the next cover. We'll have to wait until we've neutralized more of Black's men." A shout from below drew their attention. Silas Black himself had emerged from cover, standing in the open with his hands raised. "Enough," he called. "This has gone too far. I'm surrendering," Marshal Hayes responded immediately. "Drop your weapons and walk forward slowly." Black complied, removing his gun belt and dropping it to the ground. As he began walking forward, Wade kept his eyes fixed on the man, not trusting this sudden surrender. His instincts proved correct when Black suddenly dropped to one knee, drawing a hidden derringer from his boot. Before Black could aim, a shot rang out from the line shack window. Thomas's final bullet caught Black squarely in the chest, sending him toppling backward. In the momentary confusion, the remaining gunmen threw down their weapons, realizing their employer was dead and their cause lost. "It's over," the deputy said with relief. "We can move now." But Penelope was in no condition to climb. Another contraction, stronger than before, left her gasping for breath. "The baby's coming," she managed between pants. "I can feel it." Wade and the deputy exchanged alarmed looks. "We need to get her somewhere safe and clean," Wade insisted. "The shack's the closest shelter," the deputy pointed out, "and we don't have time to reach town." Wade nodded grimly. As the shooting had stopped, he lifted Penelope carefully, carrying her back to the line shack. Inside, they found Thomas still at his post by the window, a peaceful expression on his face. He had died as he had lived, with quiet dignity and unwavering loyalty. There was no time to mourn. Wade gently laid Penelope on the cot as Sheriff Davis and Marshal Hayes entered the shack. "Black's dead," Hayes reported. "His men are surrendering. We've got deputies rounding them up now." He looked at Penelope with concern. "How is she?" "The baby's coming," Wade explained, his voice tight with worry. "It's too early." Davis immediately took charge. "Hayes, ride for the doctor." "Johnson, gather clean cloths, water, anything we can use." He turned to Wade. "I helped deliver my sister's children. It's not ideal, but we'll manage until the doctor arrives." The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Penelope fought through her labor with the same determination she had shown throughout her ordeal. Wade stayed by her side, holding her hand, wiping her brow, murmuring encouragement when her strength flagged. "I'm scared," she admitted during a brief respite between contractions. "It's too soon." "This child is as strong as its mother," Wade assured her, though his own fear ran deep. "You've both survived too much to give up now." As dawn broke over the valley, painting the small shack in golden light, Penelope's labor intensified. Sheriff Davis positioned himself at the foot of the cot, his sleeves rolled up, his expression focused. "Next contraction, you need to push with everything you have," he instructed. Penelope nodded, gripping Wade's hand tightly as the pain built again. With a cry that seemed to come from her very soul, she pushed. Again and again, drawing on reserves of strength that should have been depleted days ago. And then, suddenly, a new sound filled the shack, the indignant wail of a newborn taking its first breath. "It's a girl," Sheriff Davis announced, his gruff voice softening as he wrapped the tiny infant in a clean shirt. "Small, but she's got a good set of lungs on her." He placed the baby on Penelope's chest, where she immediately quieted, blinking up at her mother with unfocused eyes. Despite her early arrival, the child appeared perfect: 10 fingers, 10 toes, a dusting of dark hair, and a fierce will to live. "Hello, little one," Penelope whispered, tears streaming down her face. "You're so beautiful." Wade stood transfixed, overwhelmed by the miracle he had just witnessed. This tiny life, emerging against all odds in the midst of violence and danger, represented everything he had fought to protect. Penelope looked up at him, her exhausted face radiant with joy. "Would you like to hold her?" Hesitantly, Wade accepted the small bundle, cradling her with hands that had known only work and weapons, suddenly gentle as a summer breeze. The baby yawned, then seemed to settle more contentedly in his arms, as if recognizing a protector. "What will you name her?" he asked softly. Penelope considered for a moment. "Hope," she decided, "because that's what she represents, hope for a new beginning." The doctor arrived an hour later, pronouncing both mother and child remarkably well considering the circumstances. Hope was indeed small, just over 4 pounds, but her lungs were strong, and she nursed eagerly when placed at her mother's breast. In the days that followed, as Penelope and Hope recovered at Wade's ranch, which had been cleared of any evidence of the gunfight, the future began to take shape. Marshal Hayes had recovered the ledger and, combined with testimony from Black's captured men, had enough evidence to dismantle the entire criminal operation. Penelope would eventually need to testify, but not for several months, plenty of time for her, and Hope to regain their strength. Thomas was buried on a hillside overlooking the ranch, with a simple ceremony attended by people from miles around who had known and respected the quiet ranch hand. Wade stood at the grave long after the others had departed, saying a private farewell to the man who had been more than an employee, a friend, a mentor, and in the end, a hero. One evening, 2 weeks after Hope's birth, Wade and Penelope sat on the porch watching the sunset. The baby slept peacefully in a cradle Wade had crafted with his own hands, a labor of love that had occupied his evenings as Penelope recovered. "I've been thinking," Penelope said after a comfortable silence. "About what happens next." Wade tensed slightly, fearing she might speak of leaving. These past weeks, despite the tragedy and danger that had brought them together, had been the happiest of his life. The thought of the house emptying of Penelope's laughter and Hope's tiny cries filled him with dread. "The doctor says we're both strong enough to travel now," she continued, not meeting his eyes. "I could take Hope, find a place in Clearwater or even further east. "Is that what you want?" Wade asked, his voice carefully neutral despite the ache in his chest. Penelope finally looked at him, her blue eyes searching his face. "What I want, what I've come to want more than anything, is to stay here with you." She took a deep breath. "If that's something you might want too." Relief washed over Wade, followed by a joy so intense it almost hurt. "Penelope," he said softly, taking her hand in his. "From the moment I found you in that field, something changed in me. This house, this land, it was just a place before. You and Hope, you've made it a home." He knelt before her chair, still holding her hand. "I know it's soon. I know you're still healing in so many ways, but I love you, Penelope Shaw. I love your daughter as if she were my own. And if you'll have me, I want to spend the rest of my life proving that love every day." Tears filled Penelope's eyes, but her smile was radiant. "I love you too, Wade Quincy." Against all odds, in the midst of so much loss, I found something I never expected to find again, a love that feels like coming home. She leaned forward, cupping his face with her free hand. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes to staying, yes to building a life together, yes to everything." Their kiss was gentle but filled with promise of healing, of hope, of a future neither had dared imagine weeks before. In the cradle beside them, Hope stirred and made a small sound. Wade and Penelope broke apart, laughing softly as they both turned to check on her. The baby had simply shifted in her sleep, one tiny hand escaping the blanket to reach toward the fading light. Wade carefully tucked the hand back under the blanket, marveling at how perfectly it wrapped around his finger before letting go. Looking up, he found Penelope watching him with such tenderness it took his breath away. "I think she approves," Penelope said with a smile. "Her opinion matters a great deal to me," Wade replied, returning to sit beside Penelope and drawing her close against his side. "After all, I'm getting a family, not just a wife." As darkness settled over the ranch, bringing with it the first stars of evening, Wade Quincy held the woman he loved and watched over the child who had already claimed his heart. From the moment he had scooped Penelope from that field, something in him had recognized what he hadn't yet understood, that, in saving her, he was also saving himself. Summer turned to autumn, and autumn to winter. Hope grew stronger each day, developing the same determined spirit as her mother. The ranch prospered under Wade's careful management, with new hands hired to replace Thomas, though none could truly fill his place. They were married on a clear December morning, a simple ceremony in the Clearwater Church, with Hope cradled in Marshall Hayes's surprisingly capable arms as he stood as witness. The Marshal had become a frequent visitor, bringing news of the ongoing prosecutions and developing a grandfatherly affection for the child whose birth he had witnessed under such extraordinary circumstances. As Christmas approached, bringing with it Hope's first smile, Penelope found Wade one evening in the barn, working on a secret project he'd been keeping from her. "What are you making?" she asked, wrapping her shawl tighter against the winter chill. Wade stepped aside to reveal a beautifully crafted rocking horse. "For Hope," he explained. "I know she's too small to use it yet, but someday." Penelope ran her hand over the smooth wood, touched by the love evident in every detail. "It's beautiful, she'll treasure it." "I want to build her a world," Wade said softly. "A safe one filled with beautiful things. You already have." Penelope stepped into his embrace. "You've given us both more than I ever dared hope for." Wade held her close, still amazed at the journey that had brought them to this moment. From a desperate encounter in a field to a family bound by love deeper than blood, their story had defied all odds. "I have something to tell you," Penelope whispered against his chest. "Something wonderful." Wade pulled back slightly to look into her eyes, seeing there a joy that took his breath away. "Hope is going to have a brother or sister," she said, placing his hand over her still flat stomach. "In about 7 months." Wonder and joy spread through Wade's heart as he lifted Penelope into his arms, spinning her around as she laughed. "Are you sure? The doctor says it's all right, perfectly healthy," she assured him. "A new beginning for all of us." Later that night, as they lay in bed with Hope sleeping peacefully in her cradle nearby, Wade reflected on the incredible twists of fate that had brought them together. One decision to investigate that splash of blue in his field had changed everything. "What are you thinking about?" Penelope asked, nestled against his side. About how sometimes the greatest blessings come disguised as misfortune, he replied, pressing a kiss to her forehead. About how love finds us when we least expect it, but when we need it most, Penelope smiled, understanding completely. About how a cowboy who scooped up a pregnant woman and didn't let go ended up saving far more than just her life. And how she saved his right back, Wade whispered, holding her close as they drifted toward sleep, secure in the knowledge that whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, they would face them together, a family forged in adversity but built to last through love. Spring arrived with new life everywhere, calves in the pasture, wildflowers in the fields, and a healthy baby boy who came into the world with considerably less drama than his half-sister had. They named him Thomas James Quincy, honoring both the man who had given his life to protect them and the father Hope would never know. And on warm summer evenings, Wade often stood on the porch of the home that love had built, watching Penelope rock their son while Hope took her first tentative steps on the grass. His heart would fill with gratitude for the day he'd spotted that splash of blue in his field, the day he'd gathered a broken woman into his arms, and in doing so, found the missing pieces of his own soul.